Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about 5 wide receiver sleepers that you need to be drafting in 2024 fantasy football in order to be a part of today's video. To qualify as a sleeper, you must go in the 10th round or later, and we are going to use a 12-team league as an example. In a 12-team league, the 10th round begins with pick 109. So if you go at pick 109 or later, you will qualify as a sleeper for today's video. Before we hop on into the 5 sleepers at the wide receiver position that you need to be drafting in 2024 fantasy football, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into 5 wide receiver sleepers that you need to be drafting this season in 2024 fantasy football. We begin with the first wide receiver sleeper that you need to be drafting in 2024 fantasy football, and that is Courtland Sutton, wide receiver of the Denver Broncos. Current aggregate ADP from ESPN Sleeper, MFL, NFFC, and Fantrax have him at pick 114. Underdog Fantasy ADP pick 92.9 as the wide receiver number 50. Now, in my opinion, Courtland Sutton is the clear, locked, and loaded wide receiver number 1 in this Denver Broncos offense, and I think that the competition is very light. Jerry Jeudy got his ass shipped off to Cleveland, so now the competition is guys like Josh Reynolds, Marvin Mims, Tim Patrick, who probably hurt his leg hearing his name be read off in this video, and Troy Franklin. Now, I am a big fan of Troy Franklin and believe that because Bo Nix, who's going to be the starting quarterback of the Denver Broncos, and Troy Franklin played in college together at Oregon as the Ducks, quack, quack, shout out to Tony Soprano, I do believe that Troy Franklin will end up as the number 2 receiver on this offense. But I don't think that Troy Franklin is going to, in year number 1, be able to leapfrog and overtake a veteran with the skill set of Courtland Sutton. I think the only thing that could potentially take Courtland Sutton down from being the wide receiver number 1, well, there's 2 things. Obviously, 1 being injury, knock on wood, we don't root for injuries, and number 2 being the contract situation. Now, everything that I have read about the contract with Courtland Sutton would tell us that everything is going to end up being fine and that Courtland Sutton will end up playing this season, but obviously there is at least a small amount of concern when it comes to Courtland Sutton's contract situation. But assuming that Courtland Sutton is able to play this season for the Denver Broncos, I think it is all but a formality that Courtland Sutton is the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Now, I get that Bo Nix on paper isn't the best quarterback on earth and that in his rookie year, I don't think that Bo Nix is going to transform himself into this top 10 unanimous NFL quarterback like CJ Stroud did last year, right? I don't think that Bo Nix is going to do that, but I don't think that Courtland Sutton needs some insane in the membrane quarterback play to succeed. Last year, the quarterback play was fine with Mr. Unlimited Russell Wilson, and Courtland Sutton was the wide receiver 39 in PPR points per game and the wide receiver 35 in PPR. He played in 16 games with 14 starts, 90 targets, 5.6 per game, 43rd, 59 receptions, 3.7 per game, 41st, 772 receiving yards, 48.3 per game, number 37, and he scored 10 total touchdowns, 5th at the wide receiver position. If you compare Courtland Sutton to the other wide receivers on this team, in my opinion, it is crystal clear that Courtland Sutton is the best red zone threat wide receiver that they have. Last year, Courtland Sutton, in terms of efficiency, was 13th in fantasy points per target and 9th in quarterback rating per target. So even though the quarterback situation wasn't necessarily the best, the balls were looking pretty paused when they were coming the way of Courtland Sutton. So I do think that with Bo Nix, Courtland Sutton is going to be solid yet again. I think he will easily be able to finish ahead of his ADP as the wide receiver number 50. Courtland Sutton is going to be a very reliable flex option in your league. And if you are in a 3 wide receiver league with 1 flex, you should be ecstatic to have a guy like Courtland Sutton on your team, because I do believe that Courtland Sutton has the skill sets to be a top 24-ish wide receiver in the NFL, and he is going to have a lot of top 24, top 18 performances this year, again, assuming that the contract situation gets all ironed out. That is the assumption that I'm under right now in the middle of July. Now, if we're in late August, and it's like, hey, Courtland Sutton hasn't signed his contract, things are looking negative, then maybe I will back up off this take. But as of right now, you are getting the wide receiver 1 in a Sean Payton offense at pick 114. Wide receiver 50 off the board. To me, that is a no-brainer. At number 2, we got Khalil. Shakir. Oh, baby, when you talk like that. Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills, aggregate ADP pick 126. Underdog Fantasy ADP wide receiver 55 at pick 108.5. Light FM. I know that's not the actual station, but I just thought that it sounded like it could be one. All right, maybe 108.5 is a station. I don't listen to the radio, but wide receiver 61 in PPR last season, 74 in PPR points per game. But the stats from last season aren't what's important, right? The stats for Courtland Sutton, we could use to make an argument that, hey, this is why Courtland Sutton's the clear number 1 wide receiver on the Buffalo Bills, or on the Denver Broncos, I should say. But for Khalil Shakir, these stats aren't going to necessarily move you towards that same exact notion we just talked about Courtland Sutton, because I don't think it is crystal clear that Khalil Shakir is the wide receiver 1 on the Bills. But I also think when you compare him to a rookie in Keon Coleman, who is considered to be a very raw NFL prospect, a guy that needs to be developed in order to be successful at the NFL level, Curtis Samuel, who has had a couple of good games here and there, but ultimately for a whole season, that guy is not consistent at all. They've got Mac Hollins, the guy who's known for walking around without shoes. He made that crazy catch that Ryan Fitzpatrick threw up against the Raiders in Viva Las Vegas, where his fucking helmet got yanked backwards. He threw it. He said, fuck it, Mac Hollins out there somewhere, and Mac Hollins caught it. That's probably the best thing Mac Hollins is known for. MVS, who's known for having stone hands, and Chase Claypool, who's known for doing TikTok, right? So they really don't have a clear wide receiver number 1 weapon. So why not take that shot on Khalil Shakir? Again, the stats from last season, they're not going to have you slobbering like a dog, right? Thinking about drafting Khalil Shakir. 45 targets, 2.8 per game, 84th. 39 receptions, 2.4 per game, 62nd. 611 receiving yards, 38.2 per game, 53rd. 2 total touchdowns, 76th. But what is positive is number 1 in yards per target at the wide receiver position. Number 14 in yards per reception. And second in fantasy points per target. Last season, towards the end of the year, when they started to try to utilize Khalil Shakir more, we saw some positive games, and we especially saw some positive games in the playoffs. 3 for 3 for 31 yards and a tug up against the Pittsburgh Steelers in the wild card round, and then in the next round in their annual loss to the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs, 7 receptions on 9 targets for 44 yards and a touchdown, 17.4 PPR points. Last season, he also had multiple games over 15 PPR points. Week number 8 up against the Buccaneers, 15.2. Week 12 up against the Philadelphia Eagles, he had 7.7 because it was actually the game up against the Jumbo Jets in week number 11 where he had 20.5 points. And then the final game of the season up against the Miami Dolphins, he went 6 for 6 for 105 yards and 16.5 fantasy football points in PPR. So, again, when you look at his stats, nothing's jumping off the page for Khalil Shakir. The efficiency stats, though, do seem promising. Those couple of flash games also seem promising to me as well. So without Stephon Diggs And without Gabe Davis, who honestly isn't even really all that notable at this point, there is a need, and not for speed, there is a need for a wide receiver one in this offense. And I think that Khalil Shakir could be the number one wide receiver in terms of targets from Mr. Josh Allen this season. And in most drafts, you're going to be able to get him after Keon Coleman and after Curtis Samuel. Am I going to sit here and tell you guys that I would bet my life that Khalil Shakir will be the number one wide receiver in Buffalo in terms of targets? The answer to that is no. But based upon average draft position of Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, and Khalil Shakir, I would rather just take the shot on the guy going the latest when I feel as though they all have similar upside, and that could potentially be league-winning upside if Josh Allen focuses in on one of these guys as the main target. At number 3, we got Magic Mike Williams of the New York Jumbo Jets, aggregate ADP pick tied for pick 132. Underdog Fantasy ADP wide receiver 61 at pick 125.2. Now, when I say the name Mike Williams, some people are going to get PTSD, right? They drafted Mike Williams. Mike Williams got poked and he missed the rest of the season, right? Mike Williams is a guy that a lot of people will dub as injury prone. Now, I am as much of a doctor as Johnny Sins, but I kind of understand the argument, right? Over his career, starting in 2023. So he played 3 games last year, 13 the year prior, but before that, 16, 16, 16, and then 10. So while recently he has been battling in a all-out war with the fucking injury bug and he can't seem to shake it off, shout out to Taylor Swift, prior to that, he was a pretty healthy guy. So, what I will say is I think that Mike Williams will be ready to go for week number 1. Now, Coach Salas said in June that Williams has a long way to go. He's on the same timeline. I don't know why I sounded Scottish for a second. Shout out to Drew McIntyre. So he's on the same timeline that Breece Hall had. They're both suffered from very similar injuries. Same time frame. You know what that means? Same time frame as Breece Hall. You remember where Breece Hall played in week number 1? Did he play? Did he not play? He fucking played. Okay? He knows he's got a road to trek. But at the same time, if he does it the right way, we're very confident that he will be ready for week number 1. Sure, maybe it'll be a little bit of a slow roll for Mike Williams to start the season, right? Because he's coming off of a torn ACL that he suffered in week 3 of last season. And I understand that the situation is a little bit different in New York compared to in LA with the Chargers. But assuming, and sometimes making an assumption makes an ass out of you and me, because maybe Devontae Adams does actually get traded to the Jets, which I don't think will end up happening. If it does, sure, then you probably don't want to draft Mike Williams as the wide receiver 61 off the board. But in the current scenario that we are living in, the most likely scenario where Mike Williams is the wide receiver 2 on the New York Jumbo Jets, I feel as though at ADP, you are getting a humongous steal. Now, based upon Mike's injury history and based upon the fact that he's coming off of a torn ACL, if he was going in like the 5th round, he would be a clear duck and cover candidate. He would be a guy that was the most blatant landmine ever, right? Like they put it in the dirt incorrectly and half of it's sticking up like a huge antenna, like the thing they've got in Canada that Drake sits on top of in the Views album cover, right? It was just blatantly obvious. It's right there. But he's not going in the 5th round. He's going at pick 132. So when you're that late in the draft, I talk about this all the time. I preach this, that as you get later into the drafts, you want to be taking more home run shots, right? I understand that Mike Williams could fully bend you over the table without the use of lube or spit because maybe he's just not the same coming off the torn ACL. Maybe they slow roll him and he is just burning a hole on your fucking bench for the first couple of weeks of the season. But because of the upside that he possesses, I am willing to do that. entering into last season, there was a lot of people that were given the full-on gawk gawk 9,000 special, the Hawk Tua, fondling the balls of Mike Williams, because people really liked Mike Williams as the wide receiver 2 in LA with the Chargers. Now, I understand that maybe Aaron Rodgers doesn't end up being the same guy, but as long as Aaron Rodgers is halfway competent, there is a very easy argument and there is a very simple path towards Mike Williams absolutely kicking in the door as the wide receiver 61. He could be a reliable flex option. Now, Mike Williams, when you think of Mike Williams, you might not think of the most consistent player, but I think there is a chance that he's a little bit more consistent in New York with the Jets. I think there are going to be games where he ends up out-targeting Garrett Wilson. Last year, he's the wide receiver 112 in LA with the Chargers, but that's because, like I said, he tore his ACL in week 3. He was the wide receiver 10, though, in PPR points per game. So while Mike Williams has been in the league for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons at this point, he's not ancient, right? He's not as old as Jerry Rice. So while he's coming off of the torn ACL, I believe in the modern medicine, it is way better than it was just 10 years ago. Mike Williams should be good to go for week number 1, like Robert Salah said. 26 targets, 19 receptions, so 8.7 targets per game, 6.3 receptions per game, 8 receiving yards per game, and 1 total touchdown. Now, normally, I like to bring up the efficiency stats. I like to dive a little bit deeper, right? But he didn't even qualify for most efficiency stats because he only played 3 fucking games, so you just don't qualify. So, to put a bow on this argument for Mike Williams, I think while he's coming off the torn ACL, at price, at ADP, the upside is just way too juicy for me not to take the shot at that late in drafts. Moving now to wide receiver sleeper number 4, we got Joshua Palmer of the LA Chargers, aggregate ADP pick 144, Underdog Fantasy ADP wide receiver 52 at pick 102.3. Now, Joshua Palmer doesn't necessarily look on the field like a wide receiver 1, right? When you watch Joshua Palmer, you're like, okay, maybe wide receiver 2 in some offenses. But, and this is a big but, shout out to Violet Myers, Joshua Palmer is in a situation where he could be the number 1 wide receiver in targets in an offense led by Justin Herbert. Now, I am someone that truly believes that Jim Harbaugh is going to run the ever-living shit out of the football. He is going to jam the football down the throat of Gus Edwards, Kamani Vidal, and J.K. Dobbins, right? But they're going to have to throw. They've got Justin fucking Herbert back there. So I think that if Joshua Palmer ends up as the number 1 wide receiver in terms of targets in LA at ADP, this is just crazy that you could get him here. Last season, he had some flash games. And we're not talking about cool math games. 21.3 PPR points up against the Raiders in week 15. 4 for 4 like he was at Wendy's for 113 yards and a tug. Week number 3 up against the cold like Minnesota Vikings. 4 receptions on 7 targets for 66 yards and a score. 14.6 PPR points and 18.3 PPR points up against the Kansas City Chiefs. 5 receptions on 7 targets for 133 yards to end off the season. He had 8 targets up against the Buffalo Bills and 10 targets up against the Kansas City Chiefs. And that was with some pretty bad quarterback play because Justin Herbert ended up getting hurt. So with Justin Herbert at full ability, and you're comparing Joshua Palmer to other wide receivers like Quentin Johnston, who couldn't even catch a common fucking cold, DJ Chark, baby Chark, Brandon Rice, Jerry Rice's son, Ladd McConkey. I think Ladd McConkey is probably the second best bet to get targets. I mean, technically coming off the board earlier than Joshua Palmer, so to many, he would be the best bet to be the wide receiver 1. But I would rather just take my shot later. Get Joshua Palmer instead of Ladd McConkey at a multiple round discount. Now, if Ladd McConkey and Joshua Palmer were going in the same round, right? If we're trying to call a spade, I probably would rather have Ladd McConkey, the rookie. But Joshua Palmer has been serviceable throughout his NFL career on the Chargers. Now he's been buried on the depth chart behind guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. You ever heard of them? Those guys are pretty fucking good. So Joshua Palmer ranking 18th in yards per target last year, 18th in yards per reception. I think he is a decent enough bet to be the number one receiver on the Chargers to where you want to take that late round stab at him. To close out today's video, the final sleeper, we got Demarcus Robinson. And based upon aggregate ADP, Demarcus Robinson is a complete sleeper. He is a deep sleeper, REM sleep, Snorlax type of sleep, right? Aggregate ADP pick 214. Undrafted, basically, is what that tells you, unless you are in a very, very deep league. Underdog Fantasy ADP wide receiver 71 at pick 152.7. So even on Underdog, he is going very late. Speaking of Underdog Fantasy, they are the sponsor of today's video. If you guys are new to Underdog Fantasy and click on the link in the video description or use promo code Notorious, you can claim your special pick plus up to $250 if you are a first-time depositor using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. Underdog Fantasy, in my opinion, is the best way to do best ball drafts this summer. I think that best ball is one of the most fun parts of fantasy football because you get to do the draft, which is the most fun thing. You draft your team, and that's it. There's no waivers. There's no trades. There is no even setting your lineup because Underdog puts the highest scores into your lineup every single week. My favorite tournament on there is Best Ball Mania 5. $25 to enter, $1.5 million to first place. Sure, it is a huge tournament, but Underdog Fantasy also has smaller tournaments on their site with smaller buy-ins. They will release tournaments with as low of buy-ins as $3. So if you want to get to practicing for your fantasy football drafts, or if you want to do a fantasy football draft with me, because I'm going to be doing drafts on there live on my channel. I've already done a couple so far this summer. Make sure you use promo code Notorious or click on the link in the video description for your special pick plus up to $250. So final guy here, Demarcus Robinson. Now, normally the wide receiver 3 on a team is basically SOL, shit out of luck for fantasy football production. But, and I know we've said but a million times in today's video, but it's true. True. But Demarcus Robinson is on a team that leads the league in 11 personnel. They did that last season, and for you non-ball knowers, 11 personnel are 3 wide receiver sets at 82%. So 82% of the time they went out there, there was 3 wide receivers out there, which is why Demarcus Robinson was able to have a very solid end to last season. His stats as a whole, he's the wide receiver 90 in PPR points per game, 79 in PPR, but that's because he only had 4 starts and 16 games played, 39 targets, 26 receptions, 371 receiving yards, 4 total touchdowns. His efficiency metrics, though, are insane. Insane for the wide receiver 3 on the Rams. We're talking about 20th in yards per target, 29th in yards per reception, 8th in true catch rate, 12th in contested catch rate, 6th in fantasy points per target, 24th in fantasy points per out run, and 5th in route win rate. This dude's like Waffle House, 7-Eleven. He is always open. Now, I get competing with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp sucks to high heaven, right? Because those are 2 wide receivers. That is a tandem of wide receivers that is Eiffel towering over defenses week in and week out, hitting the defenses with the 619 Rey Mysterio, right? Hitting them with a steel chair, right? And rightfully so. They're fucking amazing. But Demarcus Robinson still has a role on this team. Towards the end of last season, when we really started to see them utilize Demarcus Robinson more, and I think that Demarcus Robinson is the clear number 3 receiver on this team, but behind Puka and Cooper Kupp, 15.5 fantasy points up against the Browns, 13.6 up against the Ravens, then 14.7 against the Commanders, 20.2 against the Saints, 13.2 against the Giants. So, if he is able to put up numbers like that, and you got him for free in the last round of your fantasy football drafts, you will be ecstatic. There is a big difference between the guys you draft super early in fantasy football drafts and the guys you draft later. The expectation is so much lower. And if something was to happen to Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua, knock on wood, I think that Demarcus Robinson could be a league winner. Now, I think from this late of a pick, technically he could be a league winner if he is just a flex option in positive matchups, right? That would make him a league winner for you, right? If he is being positive in those games, maybe he scores 20 plus points in 2 games and you're just so happy about it. In the first couple rounds, to be a league winner, you got to be like a top 3 guy, right? Demarcus Robinson doesn't need to do that as the wide receiver 71 off the board. Again, I get sometimes it's gross to have to draft the wide receiver 3 on a team, but if there's ever a team, like I said, to draft a wide receiver 3 on, it's the LA Rams, because again, they use 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets, 82% of the time last season, and I don't think there's going to be a huge difference between 2023 and 2024 in terms of the way that Sean McVay deals with 3 wide receiver sets. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think. Who is your favorite wide receiver sleeper to draft this season? Is it one of the guys I talked about, or maybe is it someone different? I love talking to you guys down below in the comment section. While you're down there leaving that comment, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below if you're new, and whether you are new to the channel or not, make sure you leave a like on today's video. Very nice. I like. Shout out Borat. It helps me out a ton. If you want to check out one of the videos on your screen, if you haven't seen them already, make sure you check them out. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your guys' day, and we'll be back tomorrow on Friday with another banger of a video. Love you guys. Have a great one, and as always, good boy.